We're back again. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. Thank you so much for joining us on yet another show. Sitting across from me is John Ruzic. He's a real estate director with Porchlight. He and I met several weeks ago. He told me a little bit about what he's doing, and I thought this is very interesting content for the What's Working radio show, talking about trends in the workplace, the workforce, and the marketplace. Porchlight is offering trends in the marketplace. And before we get too far, John, thank you for your time and welcome to What's Working.
Thank you.
Glad you're here. Looking forward to our conversation. Give me an overview of Porchlight, a little bit of the history, and then we can get into what you're doing now and what your future looks like.
Sure. So Porchlight is a real estate developer. We're focused on community infill, community revitalization, and specifically as it relates to housing. We specialize in single family housing, and we are really passionate about bringing existing neighborhoods additional housing opportunities.
Yeah. What does that look like? I mean, so we have an existing neighborhood. We know what that looks like, but does that mean wedging in new homes between two currently existing homes? Tell me what that means.
Yeah, so oftentimes in our historic neighborhoods, and especially here in Mobile, Alabama, that there exists a number of blighted properties, vacant properties, lots that previously had single family homes on them, but have been torn down. And so Porchlight, we actively go out and seek out those properties and try to figure out a solution to building a house there with existing infrastructure, existing utilities, and sort of starting to weave that neighborhood back together.
So where did the idea for Porchlight or the perceived need for it come from?
Well, so in 2016, we formed as an experiment, or sometimes I might say a stroke of blind optimism, or a really expensive hobby. It kind of depends on the day. And the city of Mobile had recently received a Bloomberg grant to form what was known as the I-Team. So the I-Team was given the opportunity to take an objective look at a lot of problems across our city and look at data-oriented solutions to those problems. So somewhere along the way, they created, among many other things, they created a really interesting map of a property values heat map, which still exists on my hard drive and is referenced amongst the Porchlight team often. This map showed what's called a parcel map in Mobile, Alabama, and with properties valued at $100,000 plus in bright red, almost orange, and then the scale gradually would move down to a cooler blue to show values as low as maybe $1,000 per parcel. Sometime in 2015, Mike Rogers and Brian Giatina, who are two well-respected, successful, and really innovative, some may say harebrained executives in the construction industry.
Right.
They caught hold of this map, and I think what was most striking to them about looking at Mobile and this landscape in Mobile is that how quickly that map transitioned from bright red to very cool blue, and in some cases, in some urban neighborhoods in Mobile, it would happen in as little as a block.
Yeah.
So we wondered why that was. And so we started to look at some tangible quality to that data. And after driving these neighborhoods and looking at them, Brian and Mike started to understand that really what they were looking at were property values that dropped so quickly not because of undesirability, but because of blight and vacancy. Mm-hmm. So you're moving from having occupied houses to having nothing. So a vacant lot or a vacant house, a house that the roof was tarped and it was falling in, et cetera. So that rapid change in value really equated to a rapid change in occupancy. So we wanted to look at that and address that. And so Mike and Brian viewed this first as an experiment, like I said, in blight remediation. What could we do to bring vibrancy back to these neighborhoods? What would it take to move this vibrancy just one block south, or kind of have a family venture 2 doors east of what we call no man's land or the frontier?
Yeah.
And so they decided they needed to operate on a really small scale, though, in order to test this theory out and to maximize impact. And we want to return to that kind of idea of scale, because that's so much to what we do, how we operate today. But we knew that buying one lot and building one house would have very little impact. We
Right.
kind of call that, even today, we call that a onesie twosie.
Right.
But if we were able to move that scale up to, let's say, 15 or 20 or 30, what would the impact be then? Could we effectively revitalize an entire neighborhood?
So take we'll hypothetically go 1 block south, buy 15 houses or lots that are all in this blight category.
Mm-hmm.
And can we bring some energy to this neighborhood in a city that is notorious right now for having too few homes for people to move into?
Exactly.
And how easy is it to buy, let's just say, 15 houses 1 block south into the blighted area? I would imagine there's title issues, there's pride issues.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, it definitely was not easy. I mean, I think that next step after they've identified this 16 block area is they needed an agent to sort of manage the whole thing. And
Yeah.
that's where yours truly enters the scene. And I was a brand new, very green, very optimistic agent. I was working with Sam Winter and Company, a
Yep.
great local real estate company here in town. And so Mike and Brian one Monday morning walk into the office and say, we'd like to have a meeting about an opportunity. And Sam sort of calls me in to sit in the corner quietly and listen. And Mike and Brian lay this whole opportunity out. And they say, we need a bird dog effectively. We need someone who go out and find the people, call the people, and see if they can negotiate a sale.
Yeah.
And Sam hears it all, and he's saying, this sounds great. He's also a very innovative and opportunistic type of guy, and loves that community-minded sort of real estate approach. So, he loved the idea, but he knew from experience that he did not have the bandwidth to do that.
Yeah, it's going to be
So
work.
all of a sudden, spotlight on Ruzic, and you say, well, this guy's calendar is completely free.
Right.
Let's give him a shot. It's kind of one of those things, you look back and you kind of say, what sort of has helped you along your career is that day.
Being in that room.
Exactly. Whatever was happening that day. And, thankful that Mike and Brian called Sam first and that Sam kind of had the wherewithal and understanding to say, hey, this is going to really be something. But most of all, to give me a little chance to work on it.
Well, I want to get into what happened and what you're doing now, but I can imagine there would be voices in the community that, and I'm just going to call it the way I see it, 2 affluent white guys are walking down the street saying, we're going to buy your block and make it more desirable for, frankly, people like us. And that is a challenge. That is offensive to some people.
Mm-hmm.
Our world today, heck, in our world at any time, that would be a very delicate situation. How did you guys manage that?
Yeah. That's, a very good question, and something that we often are asked and we have to think about a lot and sort of reorganize ourselves in our approach to that question often. So we started by looking at the property. We mapped the whole neighborhood. We had pictures and bird's eye view maps and parcel maps and every single different way of interpreting what was going on in the neighborhood. If someone walked into the office, you might have thought we were planning like an invasion of Washington Square,
Right,
or something. But so we had just tons of maps, and then we started to look at categories and categorizing the property, and we looked at vacant land or a vacant existing structure, a home. We looked at occupied homes and whether those were owner occupied or renter occupied, and we kind of started to color code those. And it was my decision to say, if it's vacant land, let's go green.
Sure.
That means we're all go. If it's an occupied house, red. We do not want to have really any threatening contact with that person whatsoever. And if you go back and think about the value discussion that we had earlier in the heat map that the I-team produced, so much of that heat map, of that blue coloring, came from vacancy. So it was important to note that any occupancy of any kind was helped us in our goal of sort of bringing that red color, continuing that red color further down.
Right.
So we needed people who were occupying the neighborhood. We wanted that vibrancy to remain there.
Right.
So we had to work around them. We had to make sure that they weren't threatened by our presence. We had to build relationships with them. So in that year or two that I was really heavy on the acquisition, I was often parking my car and walking and making sure that everyone who was sitting on the porch knew who I was.
Yeah.
And knew what I was doing there and understood that I wasn't there to kick them out, but I was there to try to make things better. And it was really just being, very earnestly and honestly coming to them and saying, here's what we're working on.
And what was their reception to you?
by and large, they were very happy. I
Yeah.
mean, nobody wants to live next to the house that's where the roof is falling in.
Yeah.
Or where there's vermin or vagrants living there at night. You know, that's not what anybody wants. And so most folks were very happy to see investment in the neighborhood after decades of deterioration.
Right.
And you're right, there were people who were threatened. There were people who were who felt like there might be some level of like pushing people out.
Yeah.
My response to that was often that I haven't pushed anybody out, but I've only tried to bring people in.
Right.
Is really what our goal was. We wanted to make opportunities for people to come back.
I would suspect that there were some homes that the owner was ready to be done with it.
I think so. I mean, that was the acquisition and the communication with their owners was really fascinating sort of experiment. Such a huge learning opportunity for me to understand the history of the area and also the history of real estate dealings between Black and white folks.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, first and foremost, it was sort of a project in human geography.
Interesting. What does that mean?
I mean to say that looking where people had been and where they were now.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, most of the owners of this property were Black, and they had not purchased the property themselves, but had inherited it from a mother, father, or grandparent, or even great grandparent in some cases.
Yeah.
Calling them, you know, trying to find them. You'd be calling Atlanta, New York, Detroit, Philadelphia, LA, Dallas, Houston. I mean, calling all over the country. And finding these people whose origins really, you know, started back in the Oakley neighborhood or in the Down the Bay neighborhood of Mobile, Alabama.
Yeah.
You start to sort of think about, you hear stories, you sit and listen to them. And some folks wanted to talk for hours and hours, and I was all too happy to hear their stories. Some folks were really upset I had called them.
Yeah.
And you know, take that and do with it what you can. But the folks who wanted to talk were really fascinating. They would tell me stories about the corner store and the old guy who owned the corner store, and he kept a tab for everybody, and that's where you got your groceries.
Yeah.
And talked about, you know, I guess I have never been able to find it, but there's a slight incline on Texas Street. They would talk about roller skating all the way down Texas Street.
Yeah.
They talk about walking to school and that everybody's mother was everybody else's mother, and that everybody was always on the porch. And, you know, if you did anything bad, that, you know, maybe your mom didn't see it, but somebody else's did, and you'd get a whooping. And
the original social network.
Exactly. And just you paint this beautiful picture of a vibrant, family-oriented neighborhood. And the fathers were walking home from Brooklyn at 5:00, and I mean, just like church barbecues and all these wonderful stories of family life in this neighborhood. And then you start to see that just in a matter of years, the whole thing kind of falls apart.
Well, tell me, there's a lot here. What causes a neighborhood to fall apart? What are those triggers?
You know, I'm not sure I could answer that question, really. I think everyone's probably a little bit different. You know, there's social, there's political, there's health-oriented reasons that things start to fall apart. I'm not sure I could answer that question. In this case, though, you know, I have to imagine that there was, you know, this is totally anecdotal, but there was probably a severe lack of opportunity for young Black people in Mobile, Alabama in the 70s and 80s.
Well, Brooklyn Field, I'm not a historian here, but if I recall, the Air Force pulled out of there in 1969.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, left a number of the supporting neighborhoods around it without that common employer. I would suspect that, just like you said, economic opportunity was a big driver of the decline of any sort of neighborhood. So let's catch us up now. So you're eyeing these places, you're learning a little bit about them. Is the motivation of your company, Porchlight, is it an experiment? Is this are we giving back to the community? Is there a significant profit motive here? I don't hear a lot of profit motive in a lot of this.
Yeah. I still think, you know, we kind of call ourselves nonprofit, but not by choice.
Right. That's funny.
But no, we're a for-profit company. So we had in mind that we were going to build housing at a profit. I think that was where we were kind of coming to.
Yeah.
But we had to have a place to build them first. And we knew that again, that acquisition at scale was our first step.
Yeah.
So we were slowly kind of starting to learn what would be the best to build. You know, what sort of architectural style we should mirror in order, again, to sort of honor the neighborhood and its history. and what would be most conducive to the living style for people today. So all those things were being thought about, but kind of going back to what you said, we first had to look at title issues on the land.
Yeah.
And going back to the fact that a lot of these were heirship properties, they had been inherited. Oftentimes they dealt with an intestate death. What I mean by that is that there was no will for the original owner.
No kidding.
So those had not gone through probate. The property really was owned by any heir of the original owner. So if that had trickled down through 2 or 3 generations, you might have 100 heirs that you had to come you had to contact.
No kidding.
So that was one of the biggest challenges, is obtaining clear title. And we knew if we didn't have clear title on the front end, when we started building and going out and seeking out traditional financing, that would be a non-starter.
Yeah.
So we knew we had to solve these title issues now.
I remember stories like this out of post-Katrina New Orleans, where the people were trying to figure out who owned the house that's been destroyed and who's going to come back to it and who do they assess, or something like this. And these, very much like what you said, these generations had been passed down from generation to generation, and there's no real clear title.
Right.
And sleuthing that out, when you have 100 potential heirs and you've got to have each one of them, I assume, agree to the future of the property, not easy.
No, it's really not. I mean, there's ways of what I kind of call triaging it, which is just picking up the phone and calling all 100 heirs. There's other legal instruments now that are available that we can use to sort of clear that title in a more direct way.
Yeah.
And we've learned about those. We've figured out how how we can use that to our advantage. But that was another challenge. And I think what we're doing along this whole pathway is sort of we're amassing a toolbox. We're putting together a toolbox of skills that really goes into addressing both neighborhood revitalization and the introduction of affordable housing.
Yeah.
And the other thing we had to look at with affordable housing was there is no such thing as affordable housing. That's sort of a misnomer. It's subsidized housing. You can't build a house, or a for-profit developer cannot sell a house for less than what it costs to build. So you really have to find a subsidy to make that up, whether that comes through nonprofit funding or through a government subsidy. It has to exist.
Yeah.
So there are a number of different financing mechanisms out there that allow for subsidy to enter the equation in these things, and we've worked with a couple of those as well.
Do you facilitate that part of a transaction?
We try to, yeah. And so I guess that's where we're getting to, is that we took all these different skills and all these different things that we had learned about the details and the hiccups that happen in neighborhood revitalization, and we sort of put all those into one package. So today, Porchlight is still a developer. We are still developing infill housing specifically in existing neighborhoods as a part of a neighborhood revitalization strategy, but we want to do that for a client today. So we want a person who has that desire but may not know how to exactly get it going. We want to work with a municipality, a corporation, a nonprofit to accomplish that goal.
So let's say we've talked about Mobile. You mentioned Oakley and what you've learned in that process. How would a corporation come from elsewhere to engage you for that? Let's say they're in, let's just pick Pensacola just because it's down the road.
Sure.
What would that look like?
Well, I mean, I think that they would have to have a vision or a need. And so, if that's in Pensacola, let's say that the military base needs housing, they have the housing need. Now let's start to form a project around that. Or perhaps let's look at another sort of project that we've looked at a lot lately is Selma, Alabama.
Yeah.
They've had a tornado in 2020. They also experienced a lot of blight and vacancy in that neighborhood. So they may have a vision, say, we have this particular neighborhood that has real significance to our residents, and we want to see it revitalized.
Yeah. And
so we kind of start to look at that. Well, that's our project. That's our start. Let's see what all needs to happen there. And so Porchlight would offer a suite of services to folks like that.
So you get paid a fee for this, not a realtor fee, not a buy and sell fee, but just a fee to manage the project.
That's right.
And there would be some guy in the corner of the room who's had a calendar that was empty that day, much like yours was that day, that would suddenly be the feet on the ground for that project.
That could be exactly how it works.
Yeah.
But I think we would just go through and say, what is it that you need here? I think you need acquisition services to start with. Let's go out and acquire 20 vacant lots, kind of all adjacent to each other, and start to create a project scope here. And then let's start to look at design. Porchlight already has a lot of our houses designed and kind of that can be replicated and tweaked and changed a little bit to fit the environment. So let's go ahead and sort of put these houses on these lots and see how they look.
Yeah.
Let's go out and look for our financing mechanism. Is there a tax credit out there? Is there a HUD allocation that's directly to the city?
Yeah.
And then we look at who's our users. Do we want to rent these houses out? Do we want to sell them?
Right.
How much subsidy do we need to be able to make these affordable at the level at which you want them to be?
Right.
So the client in this case is really driving the ship of telling Porchlight this is what we want.
Right.
And then Porchlight's enacting that. We're going out and finding the money. We're finding the land. We're creating the design that fits in, that's congruent with what the goals are of the client. And then we're kind of managing that disposition. Where does the project come to a close?
Right.
Do we sell these properties to end users? Do we sell them to a housing authority who then manages them as affordable rentals? The options are endless.
We're going to take a little break right now to hear from our sponsor. Hey everyone, Cam Marston here. All you managers struggling with your Gen Z employees, I see you. You're frustrated by their lack of motivation, work isn't getting done, and you don't know why. You need my free guide, 3 Ways Gen X Managers Can Unlock Gen Z Potential. You'll learn 3 reasons why leaders like you are struggling and get actionable tips to boost Gen Z communication and productivity. Get it now at cammarston.com. Number of questions. Is there a community out there that's currently doing this well that you said, gosh, if we could just mirror what Washington, D.C. has done? I'm thinking of more metropolitan areas where access to downtown, which seems to be one of the themes that you've got here, access to city center being key. Could it be Atlanta? Could it be Washington, D.C.? Is there something in Birmingham that mirrors what you're trying to do?
Sure. So, one of the, as far as building and subsidizing homes, one of the communities I've read a lot about is Macon, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
That's home of Mercer College. And I think they've had a major issue with affordable housing for the faculty at Mercer College.
Oh, interesting. Here we go.
Is it Mercer University? Mercer College.
No.
Excuse me to any Mercer folks out there.
Right.
But, so they, I think in partnership have come up with ways of subsidizing their housing for faculty and staff of the university, while also revitalizing areas around the university.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a win-win that many different groups and interests benefit from that, right?
Yeah.
So they're doing that. I'm not sure exactly how they're subsidizing it, and I expect that it's financial contributions from both sides of that deal.
Right.
Another big challenge, and this is going back to scale. And scalability of property acquisition is so important to us.
All right, let me think about what that means. Scalability of property acquisition. I think what you're saying is a big bank account.
I'm saying a big property bank. I'm saying like we need to remember the onesie twosie term I talked about.
Right.
We can't go out and buy one lot and build one house. We got to go out and buy 30 lots and build 30 houses before you really see a change.
Before you can feel and see the change, before that heat map can turn to red, you got to find 20 to 30 properties.
Right.
Okay, so continue, please.
So in the that doesn't happen overnight. So while you're acquiring those properties, you're also you're mowing those properties. You might be clearing them. It's very expensive to maintain property, and so on an annual basis, that is. So cities that have found ways of sort of creating a holding entity for that property have been really successful in neighborhood revitalization.
Now, what does that mean? A holding entity?
A public entity that can hold title to that property while it's being prepared for development.
I see. Okay.
So, a private company, Porchlight got very lucky in that our property sort of the values kept up with the expense. However, when you're going into a more depressed area than Oakley, you're not going to see a whole lot of upside growth on that property. So you're really just you're adding to your basis. You're adding to the amount of money that you need to subsidize at the end of the day.
Yeah.
When you're mowing it every other week.
Right.
Or you're clearing out the property of dead trees, or you're adding a driveway, or you're replacing the curb and gutter system. So when a public entity in some way related to the city can hold property for a longer term while it's ready to be developed, while it's being prepared for development,
Right.
or this project sort of being teed up, those are cities that are really successful in neighborhood revitalization.
So the word that comes to mind that you and I talked about a little bit prior to turning on the mics was gentrification. And it's looked upon with mixed blessings from many.
Mm-hmm.
What is so you're walking down the street and you're knocking on doors and you're explaining to people who you are and what your vision for them is. And somebody says, man, it sounds like you want to gentrify my neighborhood. And I'll make something up. I've been living here for 35 years and I pay, I don't know, $200 a month in rent. And if you get your way, suddenly I'm going to be paying $800 a month in rent. And I'm not so sure I like your plan. So what is your reaction to that?
Well, it's a real challenge, and it's something I think about a lot because it's a double-edged sword. I want things to improve. You know, we go back to our example of Oakley. I mean, I'm an Oakley resident. I live 2 blocks away from where we bought our first property.
Yeah,
and so
good for
I
you.
want things to improve because I want my home values to improve, and I want more neighbors, and I want my kid to be able to ride his bike down that street, and for me to feel safe that he's doing that.
Right.
So, I really do want more people here, but I do understand that more people means that, and higher values mean that rents go up and property taxes go up. And so when the nice lady who's lived on that block, on that corner for 50 years and has had a $50 property tax bill,
Right.
it all of a sudden goes up to $800, that is the difference between her staying or going.
Sure.
So, I think that we have to be willing to accept some of these effects, the increased property values, and we need to meet those with maybe some public side or government regulations that keep some of the worst unintended consequences from happening.
Right.
By that I mean ways of freezing property taxes or having incremental increases in property taxes. I think that means having some level of rent control when we do have these project areas that keeps people and especially legacy residents from being pushed out. We don't need 100% home ownership. It's fine that people rent, but we need to make sure that their rent is controlled in a way that they don't get kicked out overnight when there's a 800% increase in their rental rate.
What are the politicians saying about this? When you've done this in Oakley and other places around the city of Mobile, this sounds like something that a politician could grab onto and champion or attack. Do you have to kind of be in constant contact with the representatives of these neighborhoods to make sure they know what you're doing?
We've definitely had some negative thoughts our way and positive. I think that exactly what I just described is exactly what politicians think.
Yeah.
As well. You know, there's fear that their constituents being pushed out is going to look poorly on them, that they weren't really willing to go up to bat for them.
Right.
I understand that. I sympathize with it completely because I have the same struggle. But at the same time, a politician wants to see investment in their district.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're happy about the investment.
Yeah.
So I think that really, and it's interesting because in Mobile, you know, we don't think of gentrification as being a huge issue here. So I don't know that there's been a lot said about it yet, but I do think that we need to start considering how we address it.
Yeah.
And how we solve it.
Yeah. So what's next? You've given us the background on where everything's come from. Talked about the challenges. I can see your vision. You're very good at describing it, of what it could look like and the opportunity. And I would suspect 60% of the communities across the nation, if not more, can identify the opportunity with what you're doing. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's probably someone else doing something similar, but you've created a package that you can now sell to Pensacola, that you can sell to Selma, something like that. What's next? Where are you going with this next?
I think that next we want to start getting as many conversations started with potential clients.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that is, like you said, the city of Pensacola,
right,
or the city of Milton, Florida, or a nonprofit agency who has an interest in housing. I think one of my goals, and this may be far off, is working with a large manufacturer who's bringing a big group of people to town who need housing. And so, maybe the Oscars and Airbuses of the world, they don't want to be in real estate. So
Yeah.
how do we work with them for them to create a mutually beneficial or subsidized package for their employees
Yeah.
to be able to have the affordable housing? And there's tons of models all over the country for that as well. Amazon does it. A lot of car manufacturers are doing it now.
Do you remember there was a day back in the history where they would create towns to
Absolutely.
support the manufacturing plant?
Company towns, yeah.
And I'm thinking right now of the GAF plant in Mobile. You know where that is?
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's still functioning. I remember
It's
it's
not.
not.
I remember smelling it.
Yeah, exactly. I remember smelling it. I have no idea what housing is like around that, but goodness knows there seems to be an opportunity there somehow. And so it sounds like we're moving back, believe it or not, to company housing. If it's potential that we could move back
Sure.
to company housing.
Well, and Mike and I talk a lot about this. I think that the same way that companies pay for their employees' insurance, or they give them a cell phone stipend,
Right.
or a medical stipend, or whatever, I think that housing has become a cost of business for companies.
Interesting.
I believe that's where we're going to go. If we don't find a way to lower the cost of housing, I think that companies are going to have to figure out some way of subsidizing their employees' housing. Perhaps this is a way, but we're waiting for the right creative company to come forward and say, "Hey, let's work on this together."
So you mentioned creative company, and it's something that's been in my mind since we started talking about this. Back in the day, there was a book called The Rise of the Creative Class.
Richard Florida.
You're familiar with
I
Richard
am.
Florida then.
Mm-hmm.
And how does his research apply to what you're doing? So let's do this for me. Give an overview of Richard Florida's work and then apply it to what we're talking about here.
Cam, you're putting me on the spot here.
I am putting you on the spot. I'm asking the questions because if you had
gosh.
asked me the question, I'd have rolled my eyes just like you did now. So what I remember
gosh.
is that it's a creative class that will inhabit a quote unquote blighted neighborhood and gentrify it, begin
Right.
to slowly turn it around.
Sure.
And their values aren't different, but what they're looking for in the places that they live are different than mine. For example, I'm 55 years old. I got 4 kids. I'm looking for something different than a member of the creative class, and I'm using air quotes on that, who could be in their mid-20s to early 30s who are looking to create something really unique for themselves, to stand out.
Sure.
And am I on the right track there?
Yeah, I think so. I always sort of, again, anecdotally think of that as with my experience of living in New Orleans. And New Orleans was a place that, has a large creative class, and especially post-Katrina, people were moving there.
Yeah.
Not really having a plan, just saying, this classic millennial, just saying, we'll all move to a fun place and then I'll get a job afterwards, right? But I started to understand that really what was driving that post-Katrina neighborhood revitalization was oftentimes this sort of creative class-centric neighborhood retail and hospitality property.
Now that's a mouthful. Go into that for me.
The corner store that was reinvented into the mixology bar. This is like 2010, like when that was really popular,
Right?
Or the they took the old train station down on where the old streetcar barn and turned it into a food hall.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about now. Yeah.
So I look at New Orleans and think that that's like what drives a lot of that. It's just, and I would love to see more of that in Mobile, is finding ways of not just building housing, but building neighborhoods, building places that we're like really proud of, that are really fun to be in.
The corner store, the corner pub, the corner hardware store,
Right?
Where, and it went away. Mm-hmm. With the Walmartization of our world, that type of stuff kind of went away, and it was an economic engine at the time. Do you believe there's an opportunity for that, or would it just be something nice to see?
I think there is an opportunity for that, but keep in mind that has to be kept in business by people who live around there.
Yeah,
I think also again in the sense of New Orleans, like it has to be something that's so unique and so desirable that people are willing to come into a neighborhood that they may not live in and may not feel comfortable in to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
But Oakley's kind of like that around Mobile right now already.
I would say that,
to my
yeah.
knowledge. I mean, they've got a corner pub, got a lot of wonderful little eating establishments in there.
Absolutely. I frequent them.
And it's a sidewalk based community. It seems like walkers and things like that. So it's possible. And am I right to say that the catalyst has got to be housing? Is that the simple single thing? Catalyst must be housing, affordable housing.
I believe that because we're working in a market that's already depressed in some of those areas.
Yeah.
Think about south of Oakley. That affordable housing is the best means of sort of bringing some revival back, some vitality back to those neighborhoods.
Yeah,
I do believe that.
And it would seem obvious to me that the communities, at least the governments in those communities, would welcome that.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think subsidizing, sort of creating a market, in other words. I think, going back to what you said, what's next for Porchlight? I think what we'd also really like to see is people following alongside our investment. And that's sort of the next step after you.
What does that mean? Following, I love that.
After you establish some affordable housing options, or you establish sort of some comparable sales or comparable rents, we've dipped our toe and we've taken the risk. And why don't you come along with us? And now there's some proof that you can write your pro forma, or you can create your budget and say, yeah, I can make some money off this.
Yeah.
And then that's a great opportunity for the onesie twosies to come in.
The synergy that you get. You've created energy and momentum, and they're going to be people that are going to not pile on, but join along.
Yeah, I think, and we're happy to have those people. This is not a competition.
Right.
There's enough work for everyone to do for 3 lifetimes, and we'll never really solve the problem of housing. So, if we're investing there, we would love to have other folks invest with us. And we have tons of partners who have done that and who have sort of, they follow us and they know what we're doing and what we're working on, and they say, I want to get alongside because, a rising tide floats all boats here. Just to share some numbers with you, earlier in 2024, I looked at what our total investment in the Oakley project was, and we've spent to date about $3.5 million down there. That's with purchasing, renovating older homes, building new homes. We worked on a couple commercial properties down there, as well as renovated an 8-unit complex on Texas Street. So $3.5 million. And this is totally windshield survey, back of napkin math, but we think that an additional $4.5 to $5 million followed us.
Oh, really? So you created a current that people jumped in behind you and pulled it down. I
think so. I think that, and I'm not going to take all the credit.
Sure,
there's a lot of other factors there, but I think that other people saw, well, there's activity down here, so I'm going to come down here too. And this is a good spot. This is a solid market to enter, where I can be confident in my investment.
$3.5 million is more than I have to spend, but it's not a huge sum of money for people that are making investments this way.
No,
it's I would think, a very reasonable investment, assuming that there's a return on the other end. The term that comes to mind is, I remember hearing this from a guy when I lived in Charlotte. He called himself an urban pioneer, which is somewhat a conflict of terminology.
Right.
You're going into the urban area, but calling
I sort of
yourself...
used the term frontier earlier on,
right.
So I understand what he means.
But he was an urban pioneer. He moved down to urban Charlotte, into the center city of Charlotte, when there was no one else that lived down there. And now, I haven't lived in Charlotte now for 15 years or more, but he was on the front edge of something that has become very popular in downtown Charlotte. What we're talking about right now is kind of something similar, isn't it?
I think so.
Creating urban pioneers, returning to the center cities. So you tell a wonderful story, by the way. You're sitting there in the corner with nothing on your calendar, and suddenly today you're here talking about this extraordinary process that's happened here. What have you learned along the way? Give me some insight into you. You've been up to your elbows in some interesting stuff that I suspect 10 years ago you never could have predicted.
Sure.
What have you learned about yourself in this?
Gosh, well, one of the biggest things I think it was in talking to all the people who we acquired property from is really starting to understand, this is not, I say from a sales process, I didn't think I was really selling anything, but, I was quite literally buying something. But, when you approach people who may be uncomfortable with you, or who may kind of supposed like an ulterior motive from you. Really trying to address that head on and be as open and honest as you can in that disagreement or that sort of pain point. Really engenders people to you, I think. Endears people to you. And so it was just really important that I sincerely listened to these stories of these ladies who were selling me their property that had been in their family for, 70 years.
It wasn't a transaction. It was an emotional disconnection that they were going through.
So making sure that I really empathized with them and their suspicions and struggles was something that was, and I know there were multiple nights where I spent till 9:00 listening to these old ladies go on and on and on about the times they spent.
The way it used to be.
Right. But then I realized it wasn't a sacrifice for me. We could have done this project correctly without having that knowledge.
Yeah.
Without knowing what this meant. And really it helped to inform where we were going.
Interesting.
By listening to these stories. So, but then I think it's just, you start to sort of separate the details from the action. And we understand now what we have to do to recreate this over and over again.
Yeah. Would you listen again?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You
100%.
cannot. Is it the listening creates the transaction, or the listening is simply the right thing to do?
Probably both. But I think the listening to this story creates sort of the vision for what's next. Like I said, we approach the question of gentrification or the question of what sets us apart as we want to honor the neighborhood as it was and not what we expect it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we are listening to these little old ladies tell their story, we're learning, we're building in our heads what our neighborhood needs to look like.
The mosaic is the way it used to be, is the way it's going to be. You avoid the term flipping. We're not here to flip your house. You may say to somebody. Right. We're here to honor the history of the neighborhood.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, that's great. Anything more? Or how can people find you? Let's start with that. How can people find you?
So we just launched our new website a couple of weeks ago. It's porchlightcommunities.com.
And I will put that in the listener notes, everyone, if you want to find out more about Porchlight, porchlightcommunities.com.
And there's lots and lots of pictures on there of our past projects. Talks a little bit about another project, which we really haven't mentioned much, which is in Bessemer, Alabama. And then...
it's in Bessemer.
Bessemer, right outside of Birmingham.
Is it similar?
Similar in terms of history, not as similar in terms of values. It was a little bit more of a challenge there in terms of where the value is and where it has not gotten to.
I see.
But, Bessemer is a fascinating little community. It was essentially a company town as well. Pullman Rail Car Factory.
No kidding.
U.S. Pipe were all based out of Bessemer. Huge steel town. At one time, I think it was bigger than Birmingham. But it's really, really fallen on hard times. And so we're working on doing some affordable housing projects there as well.
Good luck. That's great. Well, I can see the value in what you do. I can see the genuineness in the way you go about it. I can see the extraordinary learning that it's taken place, as well as the toolkit you've developed to do it in Bessemer or Selma or our hypothetical Pensacola. It's really very exciting.
It is.
Yeah.
But I'd say, if anyone listening out there wants to hear more about it, I'd be happy to call, or I love being taken out to lunch. Just kidding.
We all do. Yeah, I would imagine the heat map before and after would be pretty interesting.
I know. Yeah, that's actually one conversation we've been having lately is how do we get this updated to see where we came from and where we are now.
Right, and how the original inhabitants of the neighborhood have been protected and have not been pushed out in any way to honor that previous those residents. So that heat map before and after, as well as some of the pictures before and after to the houses that have been rehabilitated or either flattened and replaced with something that honored the previous house.
Sure.
All very good. John, thank you very much.
Likewise. Thank you, Cam.
It's been interesting, very interesting. Folks, you're listening to What's Working. All those links that you heard will be in the show notes. We will have another show next week. Reach out to me if you have any thoughts, ideas, referrals to people that you feel that should be interviewed in this podcast. I'd love to hear from you and what you think. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. We'll have another show next week, or maybe the week after that, or maybe the week after that. Who knows anymore? Talk to you soon.